And now we'd like to open it up for questions.
Hi, Rudy Rodriguez, Local 250 Steam Fitter. This is for the gentleman right there. I'm curious about the deal right there. On that picture, it looked like about an 8 to 10 inch flange with the shrouding around it. And then when you said here that if some MF were to come up, you couldn't even smell it or see it, whatever. My question is that an open system or closed system? Because if I'm looking at, if it's flanged, it's more or less an open system, right? And would they ever use a welded versus a flange system?
So let me, I'm kind of confused with the question. So
what I'm saying is, you said if there's a leak here, it's going to show up. Okay,
yes.
Which means that flange is leaking.
Correct.
So going through all the modifications, are there bypasses around every flange now to bypass that leak now?
There's many bypasses, but so the main protocol on if you start seeing an indication, remember when that paint changes, like I said, you would not get a reading at the flange. So normal protocol is work order goes in, it's worked on very quickly. We come out, you change out the bolting, and you tighten up the flange. Well, the cover comes off. Yes. So if that flange there started leaking, the craftsman would come out, pull the barrier off. He would do some maintenance on the bolting and actually tighten the whole flange. If then the flange actually gets tagged, and we actually have a list of any flange that's had any kind of indications of leaks or indications of red paint. Once so then that gets looked at on a daily basis, a shiftly basis actually. If the indication comes back, it depends on what the system is. If there is a bypass, you would actually bypass that system and work on the flange, take it apart, reface it, whatever it needs. If it's in a system that can't be bypassed, then that system is planned and shut down to actually change, to do what I just talked about. And in some cases, an engineered clamp can be built to encase that whole flange. So if you had, it's engineered to where if the flange let go, the clamp would hold that piece of pipe in place. And the clamp itself is actually injected with a Teflon-based sealant, and then the clamp itself is painted with that same indicating paint in case something was wrong, there was a pocket or something, you would start getting indications there.
So is this normally an open system, just going full throttle all the time then, most likely? Or?
Yeah, so the piping itself is a big circulation loop, okay, right? And all the main acid containing loop is got one of those barriers around any of the flanges themselves. The whole unit, whether it's main acid or trace acid, actually has the indicating paint, but the barriers themselves are in the main acid area.
Very good, thank you.
I'm Jim Enninger. I'm a member of the Science Advisory Panel for the Torrance TRAA. But the question I have was for the expert on alkylation. I think I heard correctly what you said, that ionic liquid alkylation might be decades away. Is that correct?
That's possible from a commercially viable unit being presented or offered to the refining industry. That's correct.
This is solid acid catalyst. There is a refinery, isn't there, in China that is successfully using this?
Yes, our company produced a white paper on that, alternative technologies, and at least I believe it's the one you're referring to, has had attempts at long-term commercial operation. Our last information that we have received and what we've been able to discover from research is that unit ran as what's called kind of once through, so the catalyst was not regenerated and it operated for about 30 days. But it did make commercial grade alkylate. However, the selectivity of that unit, our understanding was what we would call quite poor. In other words, it won't process the wide range of feedstocks that HF or sulfuric are capable of doing.
Yeah, my question is, if MHF is 10 times safer or less risky than sulfuric acid, why do only 2 refineries in the country use MHF and everybody else most others use sulfuric acid, or is that information also incorrect? And are you going to take your show on the road and let all those other people know they shouldn't be using sulfuric acid?
I could comment at least the first part of that. It is correct, there's only a small number of units, in the US precisely 4, and there's a number of units across the globe. I believe it's currently 4 that are using the modifier in their process. And in California, the ratio is greater of sulfuric, but that's not the case across the country. The installed alkylate producing units, sulfuric and HF, hydrogen fluoride units, is about equal in the US. It's about half sulfuric, half HF, and that's pretty much true worldwide. Some countries, the ratio is much higher. Like in Spain, there's almost all HF and no sulfuric units. In Mexico, it's the case anyway. But it's about a 50-50 ratio.
So the question you would ask, the second part of that question was on the less risky. The MHF unit with the mitigation systems that were installed in this unit when the QRAs were done in the 90s is actually 24 times less risky, not 10 times. 10 times is the airplane traffic versus airplane flying versus driving. And that comparison is for this specific location with the specific configuration of this unit. At other locations, that comparison of 24 times less risky may not be that same level. In general, wherever MHF has been with the additional mitigation, we have found that the risk of an MHF unit with these additional mitigation systems is at least as comparable to a sulfuric unit. In this particular case, it's actually 24 times less risky, according to the independently reviewed QRA studies that were submitted.
Yes, there's been some various numbers thrown out about the ratio between the modified and hydrofluoric acid being currently used. Is there a definitive number that you can share with us about how much is being used?
Councilman, is your question how much MHF is stored on site, or? Okay, yeah, I know in our risk management plan, it's 250,000 pounds. Is that the number used in the RMP? Yes. Thank you. And that's split. Essentially, Kirk can help me out here, but you have about 50,000 or 60,000 pounds in each of the settlers, and then the rest of it is distributed throughout the rest of the unit.
My question has to do with electrical power. I heard a little bit about it, backup power, battery power. If you lose power from their commercial company, you've got a backup power to take care of critical systems. And that's only to have an elegant shutdown. It's not necessarily to run the entire plant. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how that happens here and what possibly you're planning in the future.
Is your question as far as future reliability of power to the refinery?
If you lose primary power from the power company and your substation out here, some of the problems that you've had in the past has been loss of commercial power. And so how quickly can you substitute that power for your critical systems And you have battery power, do you have standby power? How long will that last, and what's your plans for the future?
Sure. So, Mayor, I do need you to help me out here. But for the critical systems that have backup power, that's fairly instantaneous, right? That's right. So the critical systems will immediately kick on to battery power. We also have our own generating capacity on site. How many megawatts?
We generate approximately 40.
So we have about 40 megawatts of our own generating capacity that we can also distribute within the plant. However, when there is a sudden loss, complete power loss to the refinery, we cannot keep all of the steam generating equipment on. And without steam, which is essentially the lifeblood of a refinery, we do have units shut down. And when units shut down, the only safe, industry-accepted way to stabilize the refinery is for us to flare. Now, I know when you see a large flame coming out of the flare, for people who don't work here in the refinery, that can be disturbing. We get that, we understand that. We're working very hard to eliminate as much as possible as we can the use of the flares. What we've decided to do, working with Southern California Edison, is right now the refinery receives power through a Southern California Edison substation into 4 overhead lines that feed the refinery. What we've decided to do, and the project that's currently underway to achieve exactly what you described, is we're going to eliminate our reliance on Edison's equipment and no longer come through that substation and no longer rely on their overhead lines. We are installing 2 of our own redundant underground lines directly to their 220 system. We're going to bring that power into the refinery, and we will manage that ourselves within the refinery. We think it's the fastest, most efficient way for us to essentially long-term eliminate 90% of the power susceptibilities we've had relying on Southern California Edison.
In February 2015, there was an explosion, and what the Chemical Safety Board has categorized as a near catastrophic event. Now, what have we done to mitigate that from happening in the future? What are the possibilities of that happening again? And I heard something about earthquake proofing of pipes. Up to what magnitude has that been done?
I'm not really sure what, all I know is we had to meet the code, and the code changed, and like I said, the vessels were built to a certain code. That assessment's done every 5 years. It was found to be that there was just a couple of vessels in the Alky unit that this assessment's done throughout the refinery, by the way. Those couple of vessels that we fixed to beef up the bottom of these vessels, I don't know. I couldn't tell you what that brings you up to. If it's you're talking about is a 7.5 and 8. I have no clue. I'm sure we can get you that information though.
Yeah, Councilman, we'll try to follow up and get you that information. On the part of your question about CSB and what the CSB characterized as a near miss, the CSB's final report isn't out yet. But I can tell you, based on what they've shared with us, every one of their recommendations has already been addressed by the refinery, and those changes have been instituted. Whether or not we would classify it as a near miss, apparently I'm going to let Rich Gogler answer that question.
I can help a little bit on the earthquake question. The CalARP, they constantly update the earthquake fault lines and what the maximum expected design earthquake is for all the faults in Southern California. And so when you do an update, you have to design for the earth movement in your area per these updated maps. So whatever the maximum expected earthquake at this site is what our foundations get upgraded to.
Thanks, Rich. And back on the CSB. So I've actually personally interviewed the operator who was on the console for the alkylation unit the day that explosion occurred. And what they told me was they heard an explosion. From what they could tell on the board, everything was fine in the alkylation unit, but not knowing what happened, they hit the evacuation button. And so within 2 minutes, 80% of the acid had already been evacuated out of the unit, and within 7 minutes, it was all evacuated. Turns out the alkylation unit remained perfectly stable. There was no harm done to the unit, but yet that operator, not knowing what the condition was, went ahead and hit the evacuation system, and it was completely evacuated. When Exxon gave its presentation to the CSB, they explained it this way, and as you know, we didn't own the refinery at the time, so I'll borrow from their presentation. What Brian Ablett explained at the time was there was only one piece of equipment in the refinery that was compromised by debris from the explosion. It was a pipe. It had nothing to do with the alkylation unit. It contained hydrocarbons. It was made of 1/4-inch thick steel. The near miss has been characterized as debris that could have pierced the settler tanks that you saw the picture of. The settler tanks are 2-inch thick steel. So it would have taken a great deal of force to pierce that tank. The other thing to understand, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, about the settler tank is that's exactly what it is. It's a settler tank. And much like oil and water, where oil floats to the top, within the settler tanks, oil sits on top of the acid. So even if the settler tank had been pierced, you would not necessarily have had acid released. You would have had hydrocarbon vapor released. And again, the acid is being evacuated from that system anyway. So we understand the CSB's concerns, and there has been a lot of work done to evaluate the risk posed by the conditions that existed that day. But we believe the unit was maintained properly and operated safely. Kurt or Marie, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I'd like to add that further to that incident, a similar incident had happened years ago that kind of became the talking point for this in Texas City, where a very large piece of equipment was dropped from, it was a convection or top section of a large process heater, a very heavy piece of steel that was dropped on top of an acid storage tank at Texas City. And when that crane tipped over and dropped it on top of that tank, it sheared off a piece of pipe and a nozzle, and essentially an unmitigated release of anhydrous HF had occurred from that. And yet none of the predicted discussions about what that impact might be actually occurred. There wasn't a single off-site fatality from that instance. And part of what TRA's document we discussed as a group had related that the piping system along the settler was at risk, when in fact those pipes along that settler system were cooling water and not process piping. So I think the story needs to be told accurately.
Hi, I'm Al Merthucci. I'm the State Assembly member representing the area. I appreciate tonight's presentation. Jeff, this is probably the 5th or 6th time that we've met, and once again, I appreciate all your the information that you've shared. You've always been very straightforward with me, and I've tried to be straightforward with you. I want to thank all the panelists for all of your presentations. I guess I don't have a question as much of a comment. I hope you'll indulge me, but I think the real issue here, as far as the community is concerned, is that there is a crisis of confidence with the refinery. Ever since the explosion 2 years ago and the series of accidents, the fires, the explosions, the unplanned flaring, combined with the series of reports that have been coming out, starting with the Chemical Safety Board saying that it was a near catastrophe, and then the Cal OSHA fining the previous operator, ExxonMobil, over $500,000 for willful and intentional violations. And then now, just a couple days ago, seeing the report from the US EPA, again citing repeated violations, safety violations. So I understand, you know, the comment I appreciated the most was from Kurt Lawrence, your comment about how you've lived here and you've raised your family here, because that gives you credibility. You know, and I think all of us, you know, appreciate that. But there's a real concern in the community about whether this refinery can be operated safely. And there's the real concern about this issue of hydrofluoric acid. And it doesn't seem to be limited to this community. And I think there are a lot of smart people in this community, you know, who are trying to get past the political rhetoric and really get to the facts. So I just, you know, I want to work with the refinery as I want to work with the refinery workers. We're not trying, speaking for myself, I'm not trying to shut down the refinery. We just want a safer refinery. We understand or we respect that the refinery is a big source of jobs. It's a big source of revenues for the city. It's an important part of the local, regional, Southern California economy. We just want a safer refinery. And we want these unplanned accidents. We want these unplanned flaring incidents. We want this to stop.
Assemblyman, thank you, and thank you for coming tonight. I know you probably chased down from Sacramento today to be here, and I really appreciate that. And as you and I have talked about in those several past meetings, and I'm sure there will be future ones, many of the items on your agenda on things we look forward to having a dialogue on, they're not necessarily issues you and I are going to resolve in a vacuum. They will involve the fire department, they will involve Coupas, they will involve other agencies and other parts of the community, but they are intended to improve refinery safety, not just here, but throughout the state. And they are items we do at other refineries in PBF, and there are things we look forward to having that dialogue with you on when your spot bills are eventually developed into language that can be put forward, and so we look forward to that. In my opening comments, I hit on exactly what you said. We have to perform better. There is no argument from us, from the management, from the people here at the refinery. We have to earn the public trust. And we haven't done a good job of doing that since July 1st. We are investing a lot of money over the next 3 months to help get us to where we run more reliably and incident-free, and that's just something we have to do. I don't disagree with you. We just have to do that. As far as the EPA report that came out, I think it's very important to read what the EPA wrote. What the EPA wrote is they are preliminary findings. They're not violations. It was not a notice of violation. They are things they noted during their inspection. We are looking very forward to meeting with them. Some of the things that they noted have already been addressed. Other things are simply information that wasn't available for the 3 days that they were here that we'll be happy to provide to them. So I think you will see, and I committed to the mayor and the council members to coming in and speaking with them to address the concerns that were raised by that EPA letter. But I think you'll find that we can put a lot of the concerns in that letter to rest.
I'm a representative of the steelworkers, and if you indulge me, I would like to add something to the answer to Councilman Herring's question about what's been done about the February 18th, 2015 accident. Arising from the August 8th, 2012 Chevron Richmond release and fire,
the governor established an interagency task force on refinery safety. And that process is about to end with the adoption of Cal OSHA board of recommendations coming out of that interagency task force. And I've been one of the people involved in that 4.5-year-long effort. I believe that every root cause identified by the Chemical Safety Board at both the Chevron disaster in Richmond and the ExxonMobil explosion is going to be adequately addressed. For example, one root cause in both accidents was what's called damage mechanism review. I don't want to get too technical, but one was looking at sulfatization, another was looking at erosion on the slide valve. Those things will have to be incorporated in the process safety management performance at all California refineries, including this one. We think, the steelworkers think, this is going to be a very, very great improvement for safety for both us, our building trades, craftsmen, co-workers, and for the surrounding communities. So we welcome that change, and it's overdue. But we think that that will address that concern, Councilman Herring. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Schaefer. I'm a chef in a restaurant here in Torrance, and I've been in this community for over 25 years now. First of all, I was totally enlightened by the whole program that you put on. And one of the things that I noticed were all the different government agencies that, let's say, babysit you constantly. I can't even fire up my grill at the restaurant with AQMD not coming down on me and checking how much smoke I'm putting out. So I can only imagine what you go through on a daily basis. I do know one thing. In the 25 years that I have been in this community, this refinery has been a great partner in the community, not only with the 300+ jobs, but all the other philanthropy that it conducts in the community. And I, for one, want to make sure that it stays in this community, because we already lost another large company this year. And I don't know if you've ever heard of them, Toyota. Well, I don't want to lose any more major companies in the South Bay. So my 2 cents, if it's worth anything, is working with the fire department here in Torrance for so many years and working with you, I feel very confident that you're doing everything in your power to make sure that this community is safe for not only your workers, your employees, but for everyone else who lives in the community. So I thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Griffiths from the Torrance City Council. As you all probably know, our city council's taken a lot of flack for our positions on the situation here with the refinery. But I want to comment is that we did pass a resolution that did exactly what Assemblyman Marsucci asked for, and that's to have the refinery be as safe as possible. That's all we think we can do, and it's exactly the words that the Assembly member used. We're not the experts to decide what chemical mechanism you should be using in your alkylation unit. We want to leave that to the experts, and I hope that the politicians involved will do the same. But I do have a couple of questions that I really like to have addressed. You showed a couple of slides comparing some of the statistics that TRAA has been touting versus what you claim to be the facts. And I've asked for this before. I'd like to see a slide-by-slide comparison of their position versus yours. You need to get that information out if you're going to have any credibility about trying to say what they're saying is not true. So I asked for that, and I hope that that will be forthcoming. The other thing I asked for, and probably one of the number one questions that I've been getting repetitively, is a lot of scared people in our community calling and emailing me saying, I'm scared to live in Torrance. I know how I answer that question, but I'd like to hear how you answer that question. These people are afraid for their lives. How would you reassure a resident in Torrance that their life is safe? Help me answer that question as best I can.
Mike, I think what I would do is I would tell you what I started out the evening with. There are over 300 households in Torrance and hundreds more in the South Bay area whose family members work here and are responsible for the safety of themselves, their coworkers, their families, the school, and the community. If over 300 households within the city of Torrance send people here to work every day, and they are working towards making sure everybody in the community is safe, I don't know how else to answer that question. I think Mr. Shepard and the other members of the panel described to you all of the engineering that goes into trying to make, in particular, the MHF unit safe. And there are obviously numerous other safeguards throughout the refinery to do exactly the same thing. As I mentioned to Assemblymember Marisucci, we know we have to perform better. I think a lot of that fear and a lot of that lack of confidence comes from not only the 2015 explosion, but the incidents that, quite frankly, sometimes I think get a lot more attention locally by some press than they deserve. But nonetheless, we've had those incidents. We need to do better. We need to improve. There is no substitute in our business for running safely and reliably, and that's what we need to do to earn that confidence of the community and to make them feel more secure.
All right, with that, I'd like to thank our panel for presenting tonight. We appreciate your time. And as Jeff mentioned earlier, this is just the beginning of this conversation. We look forward to having many more conversations, and we are here. If you have any questions, please contact us. And I want to thank you for your time. There was, the meeting Tuesday night. We're meeting tonight, which we really appreciate you coming to this. And we also have the AQMD meeting on Saturday. So again, we very much appreciate your time. Thank you, and have a good evening. Safe drive home.